Welcome, Mark, to my podcast, Intensify Humanity. Finally, I'm able to meet you, talk to you, and finally, we could close this date. I know how much busy you are. And let me just first tell you, you're a big inspiration for me because coming from where you are, plus what you are doing currently, in terms of not only podcasts, but interviewing and knowing other people and bringing out stories, it's lots of other things. So thank you for being an inspiration.
That's what I'm here for.
Definitely. So, Mark, let me ask you by this first question, how you generally begin your day?
Yeah. So I remember how I first began my day growing up as a kid. It would usually be me waking up at like 6 a.m. to go to school. And like my mom would come and wake me, or like my alarm clock would ring or something like that. And I remember instantly I would just be in a state of anxiety. I would be in a state of panic just whenever I woke up. That was basically like my life. And ever since in about 2016, I began to change my life around. And I found that, having a morning routine is pretty important. And, at first it looked like something like reading and then meditation, and then I would go to the gym. And through the years, it's changed a lot. And it always is changing, just based on what I've learned that's new, what I've found that works for me now that's better. So for me, the way that my morning usually starts is when I'm still in bed and I first gain awareness that my consciousness has now awoken. And I'm like, it's like those first few seconds when you're in bed and you're like, oh, it's a new day. It's like, you're out of the dream world. And I usually kind of use that time where you're like half asleep. And I try to do this thing called like lucid dreaming. Depending on who you talk to, it can take on many different forms. But basically what I do is I still try my best to like tap into sort of being in that state of not really awake and half asleep, to imagine and to visualize what I want to happen for today, or just think about crazy ideas that I normally wouldn't be able to think about, like right now, like in my normal waking conscious state. And then when I do that, I usually get up, I drink some water. I try my best to like do some stretching, whether that's like a full-on yoga session or it's just like me just like doing like a 10-minute stretch. I live on the East Coast of America, the Northeast. So it's pretty cold here. And so I try my best to go for a walk, but sometimes I can't get myself to do it. It's like 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't even know what that is in Celsius. But if I can, I'll go for a walk. And then usually I'll try to meditate. I'll try to journal. I'll write stuff down. And then I'll usually go to the gym. I'll lift. I'll work out. Depending on the day, I might do some cardio. I might run. I'm training for a triathlon in June. So that's what I've been doing. And then, for me, like the morning, it can look different from day to day. But generally speaking, it's just a time for myself to kind of figure out like what's going through my mind, get my mind sorted, get my body sorted. And that's usually what it looks like.
The thing that you mentioned, to become conscious in that unconscious state, is so important, because people generally, what happens, they just jump out and they think of all the problems that is going to come in the day. Yeah, that is very powerful.
It's super powerful. And you never know, like, the simplest things can change your life. Like if you just, on that conscious breath, you just like take a breath and you're just like, dang, I made it. Like there's literally, I don't know what the numbers are, but there's maybe like, in America, like 10,000 people that literally died last night. Like they didn't wake up. And so it's like, if you can just start your day off with something like that, even though, if someone's listening to this and they don't do that, it might sound stupid or it might sound gimmicky, or it's like, why would you tell that to yourself? I have to do this thing and I have to do that thing and I have to do this thing right away. And I don't have time to bring myself into consciousness or meditate or do whatever. And it's just like, well, then you're just going to keep on getting the same results, and if that makes you happy, go for it. But if it doesn't, you now know what to change.
Yes. Gratitude, one of the most powerful thing in the world. Yes.
I agree.
Right. So, your this kind of journey, like meditation, yoga, gratitude, consciousness, unconsciousness, all this kind, when did it exactly start? In other words, as per your experience or your story that I've heard, you did not have a normal, general childhood. You faced a lot of challenges, a lot of internal stuffs that were going on in terms of social anxiety and depression. So, when did it exactly start, and how did you realize, identify that you were having some kind of internal problem? Because many people cannot identify that.
That's a great question, right? And like you said, or what we said before, it's like, it's all about becoming conscious of it, right? Because if you're not conscious of something, it is still governing you and controlling your behavior, even if you don't know about it, right? So it's like, there's this analogy that's like a fish in water. And it's this analogy that says like, let's say, there's a fish and it's in a fish bowl. Okay. And that fish is swimming, it's living its life. And then, let's say it's talking to its other fish friend. And it's like, hey, did you see the water? And the fish is like, what are you talking about? They're like, what's water? Like, I'm just moving my body. And so basically it's an analogy that says, this water, it's everywhere. It's completely surrounding the fish. The fish is living in water at all times, right? But it doesn't see it. And so what happens is, let's say that fish tries to go above water, it can't. And so the water is controlling its behavior. And so, you take any kind of issue, whether it's some kind of like trauma and it manifests its way into social anxiety or an eating disorder or being overweight or being angry all the time. Everyone has issues. But, if you walk up to a kid that is still facing those issues and they're not conscious of them, same analogy of the fish in water, and you say, hey, do you see this water or do you see this anxiety? They're going to say, wait, what's anxiety? They won't even know. And so, yeah, so I had a really interesting life. But the moment when I realized things weren't as good as they could be, or I had a problem, was probably two moments. One moment was in terms of me finding out I had social anxiety. This was in college. Growing up throughout my life, I never really experimented with drugs or alcohol. But when I went to college, I did. And I remember I was at this college party and I remember I got drunk, right? I drank alcohol. And, a lot of us know that alcohol is a social lubricant, right? Alcohol impairs your judgment. And so all of a sudden I'm at this party and now I could speak my mind. Now I could talk to people. And I just kind of stopped and I'm like, wait. Like, why wasn't I able to do this before? And so that was maybe one of the first times where I actually became conscious that I did have social anxiety. And the time where I realized where I had just really serious, like general anxiety and also depression was when it was towards the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. This was also in college that same year. And I was maybe about, during that year, I gained like over 75 pounds in weight. So I was like 220 pounds. I was never really overweight throughout the rest of my life. And I was just doing that to fill a void in my soul with food. And, I had a ton of other issues that we don't have to get into. But basically, it got me to a point in my life where like I just didn't know how to fall asleep anymore. And so what I did was I would just try to walk around in the middle of the night in my city at like 2 a.m. And I was also getting like suicidal thoughts of just like fantasizing about wanting someone to walk up to me and try to kill me, try to mug me, because I didn't really know what was going on in my life. I wasn't conscious of it, but I just felt pain. And I was like, I tried to eat the pain away. That worked for a short time, but then it stopped working. I tried to, whether it was alcohol or drugs, I tried to do that, but then eventually they stopped working. I tried to, binge watch Netflix and whatever silly kind of stupid YouTube videos. And that was working for a time, but then it stopped working. And so it got to that time where just nothing I did to cope with the pain worked. And so I remember on one of those nights where I was walking, I kind of felt like so I don't remember when exactly this was, but I remember I was walking on the street and the street was completely silent. There were no cars in the road. I wasn't playing on my phone. I wasn't distracting myself. I wasn't with anybody. I wasn't listening to music. And, I think I was just so desperate, and I was doing things that I've never done before, that I think whatever you believe in, your soul, God, the universe, consciousness finally spoke to me. And I got still and I got silent for one of the first few times in my life. And it's not like I heard like audible words, but in that moment, I sort of realized that there was something much deeper and much more purposeful than sort of like, this reality that we just see out of our eyes that's in black and white every day. And when I experienced that, it gave me a slight glimmer of hope. And I remember like running back to my apartment, my college dorm room. And it's not like, I was like, I'm going to change my whole life around now. At this point, I was still relatively unconscious. But I remember I went to the bathroom and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I noticed that I was overweight. I noticed that I had gained weight. I noticed that my pants were very tight on me. And that was maybe the first time where I realized that there was something wrong. And I was just like, wait, like who am I? Who am I becoming? What do I even stand for? And that was maybe like the first moment of awareness where I realized like, oh snap, like, things are off in my life. And those are probably those first two moments of conscious awareness.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing it in so deep. And just as you mentioned that when you first started having alcohol, then you first realize that why can't I be like this when I'm not under the influence of alcohol? You just had that
Right.
moment of truth. So would you say, or if correct me if I'm wrong, that you were one of the few, blessed person who could gain that consciousness at that point of time somehow, because there are so many people out there, especially the kids, who commit suicide because either they don't identify that, or they don't get help, or they don't realize that even, there are knocks on their doors.
Yeah. So I mean, honestly, what you just said is something that, I thank God for every day, right? Because I look back to that same exact moment and I was like, wow, I could have actually just killed myself, or something bad could have happened. And that I am eternally grateful for. And I'm grateful for, despite me having troubles, I also had a lot of great things in my life, right? Like my parents never abused me. They were always there for me. I didn't fall into the wrong crowd too much. I didn't get too far down the rabbit hole of like drugs and alcohol and messing up my brain. And so, yeah, I'm very eternally grateful for that. But, also looking back at it now, I've learned that I am very much someone who is 0 or 100. So what I mean is like, I'm very serious about things all throughout my life. And what I'm talking about is, a lot of people, they may experience these issues, but they may, for example, write them off and say like, oh, that voice that I heard, or that moment that could have led to a moment of self-actualization, oh, that's just, whatever. I'm just going to go back to my friends and I'm just going to get hammered and, do X, Y, and Z again and again. And I'm not saying that, it's not like I did not go back to those things. It's not like I, completely changed my life around in one night. But also I felt like for me personally, I, experienced a lot of adversity when I was like a young person, in terms of psychologically speaking, from ages like 9 to like 18. So that's almost a decade. And, for me personally, so to rewind here, so my parents, I'm sorry if I go on a tangent right now, but so my parents, they came here from Egypt to America. And, I didn't really see my dad when I was growing up because he was mostly at work. But as my parents sort of got better jobs and made more money, we moved out of the inner city, which was just filled with like violence and drugs and alcohol. And I saw crazy things when I was a kid, to a better place outside of the city in like a rural town, in a small town that had like 5,000 people. And in that town, there was a lot of great people. And there were also a lot of not so great people. And I don't remember what year this was in, but I think I was in like third grade. And, like 9/11 in America had happened pretty close to that time. And, I'm Middle Eastern, right? And so I, got hit with like this massive wave of like racism and bullying. Mostly every single person at that town in the school that I went to was all white. There was nobody that looked like me, that was a different race, that was a different color. Like I remember I got beat up at the playground. People would call me a terrorist. People would call me a sand nigger. People would do all these sorts of things to me. I remember I got like made fun of in my class by my teachers, just like, crazy things that is still happening today in America. And so when that happened for me, that kind of put me in like a bubble. And I also began to develop some health issues, some physical and some mental health issues. I began to like go to doctors, get medicated, all this kind of stuff. This kind of put me in like a bubble in my life where I just like stopped talking to people. I saw the world as a hostile place. I was just trying to survive every day. I had no friends. And so I kind of lived in that mindset, in that mentality for 10 years, for literally a decade of my life. And so I knew, even though I was in that water, even though I didn't know it at the time, when I began to wake up from it when I was 18, I realized what was going on. And I realized that life can really suck. Like life can be really terrible. Like I don't wish what happened to me would happen to anyone. Like, for me, like I literally, like I remember I was a terrible student too. But I would still prefer to be in class rather than like go to lunch, because at lunch I would always sit by myself, and in class I could, pretend that I had friends and I could pretend to sit next to people. And it was just a very, very lonely, terrible mindset place. And even though I had like, my parents, my mom, my dad, my sister that loved me and always supported me, I couldn't feel or receive their love or support because I didn't have it on the inside of me first. And so I feel like, to answer your question, I feel like not a lot of people have lived that way for that long. Maybe someone is in that and then they go, join a sports team and they have like 3 friends that they make and their friends support them. And then they like slowly begin to get, I didn't have any of that. And of course, it's not like I'm, my life is not just terrible things. I had a lot of great things happen to me in my childhood. And I did have some, relatively shallow success. But I felt like I was so far down the rabbit hole that I knew what the alternative was. And every time that I tried to get away from the conscious right path, I would be reminded of, hey, Mark, this is not new territory for you. You've sucked at life before for like 10 years. And so I feel like because of my struggle, like I speak around the world now and I tell people this. I say, I literally spent the first 18 years of my life not wanting anybody in the world to know who I am, to not wanting anybody in the world to know about my story, to not want anybody in the world to know about the anxiety that I faced every single day. And I tried to hide that. And now every day, that's literally all I do, whether it's on podcasts or writing, books, speaking, this, and that. That's all I do today. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And I'm sure, if I didn't have as much struggle, or I was a different person, or I wasn't as sensitive, I don't know, I wouldn't have done what I did. So I'm grateful for it. I'm very lucky. But also I definitely had to earn it too. I had to earn it through blood, sweat, and tears. And that's what enables me to be successful today, because I was so unsuccessful before.
Thank you for sharing that intimate details, because yes, being blessed is not, you have to earn it. So you earned it literally, because you really had a rough patch in your life that time. And which brings me to my next question is, what is your purpose in life?
Man, this is a great question. So, honestly, I think it's definitely changed. As I've learned more about myself, as I've learned more about the world, it's really changed. But honestly, for me, in terms of like my legacy on what I want to happen, I don't really care if people know my name or not, or remember me when I'm dead. I used to, but I'm just like, I don't really care. For me, it's like, okay, this is going to sound really weird, but I honestly think when like 500 years from now, whatever society is looking back at like history of this time, I hope that I'm able to be a member of the conversation of the people that, really eradicate poor mental health, that eradicate mental illness for billions of people. Because I think it's definitely possible. The same way that, I think it's the 1700s, when there were millions of people dying from the bubonic plague because of deadly bacteria, and then someone invented the antibiotic, and then now they're like, wow, all these people don't have to die anymore. That's what I hope. I am somehow a contributor towards that. And I'll tell you, if you look at the world today, this world has never been better. Even though if you turn on the news, you look at the news, this country just bombed this country, this place is on fire, this, and that. That's true. But in my opinion, a lot of these problems are minuscule. And I'm not saying that to discredit them at all. These are, there's a lot of serious problems in the world that we have to address. But compared to what it used to be, I think a lot of these problems are better than history, than what we had before, than, World War II, where there were millions of people dying in the street and countries nuking other countries. But to me, in terms of my perspective, in terms of my eyes, you look at the statistics, the data, and, there's almost 1 million people that commit suicide every year around the world. And that's more than people murdering each other. So you're more likely in today's society to kill yourself than to have someone else kill you, which is so strange. And I remember for me, when I was suicidal, looking back at that now, what I realized was this, and a lot of people hear this, and this opinion might be controversial, but I would just say to listen to it. And this is what I would say. The feeling, the emotion that someone has to kill themselves is actually a good thing. Now, what I mean by that is this. Your body, your mind is trying to find a way to create a new version of yourself. You cannot create a new version of yourself if you are still living with who you used to be. So what I learned when I was suicidal is that I wasn't actually trying to kill myself. My mind was trying to figure out, okay, how do I eliminate the previous unconscious version of myself that I had created through survival reasons to be able to live who I actually want to be today? And so, of course, a lot of people don't get that far in processing that emotion and unfortunately do kill themselves. But I think if we reframe this conversation, if we teach people that, mental health is more about, you at the final moments of your death, and you have to call the suicide hotline, or you have to go to a doctor to get prescribed an antipsychotic drug. Mental health is something that you can do ever since you're a kid. Is something that you can participate in every moment of your day. But the matter of the fact is, it's just not taught to us because it's not prioritized. Why? Because human life in and of itself is not even valued that much. And it's today in our society, it is just becoming valuable. And like what I mean is, if you look back to less than 100 years ago in World War II, the government was literally taking young men, forcing them to put their name and to wear a uniform and to wear a certain color to go kill other young men wearing a different color. And there were literally people dying by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Human life, like society valuing human life, is something that is still brand new. And not a lot of people get that yet. And so if we can, in terms of mental health too, like, you look at countries in the Middle East, you look at countries like in India, you look at countries in South America, nobody talks about mental health. Nobody. And so if we can start to bring this conversation forward, and we can, sort of stop phrases that are like, mental health only looks like people that are born with like genetic mental disorders like Down syndrome, but mental health is actually a facet, a capacity of each person, the same way that physical health is. I hear some people say things like, you can't get depression or you can't get anxiety if you believe in God, if you're religious from that space. And it's just like the whole conversation is so messed up. And if I can be a player in sort of reversing that, I hope that can be my purpose by the time I'm dead. So, man, that was a long answer.
That was so profound, and your purpose is so powerful, Mark. And one thing, you gave me a new way to look at it, that, when somebody wants to kill themselves, it's a good thing. I mean, that concept is so profound that you shared. I loved it. If only people understand that, because it is what it is. Because until and unless you want to become the better version of yourself, nobody else can help you to become that. And maybe it's a life way of teaching you. Profound.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something that I always think about today is something that I always look at today is like, I read these articles, whether it's on LinkedIn or it's Instagram posts that have like motivational quotes. And I'm always thinking like, if I was who I used to be, like super depressed and anxious, and I read that, would it even help me? And of course, some content out there can help someone, but I feel like so much of this helpful stuff online is written in a way that won't really reach someone who's at the lowest point of their life. And so, I've shared this like on stages and stuff about what I said about having that emotion to kill yourself is actually a good thing. And, I've had people that come up to me after and they're like crying and they're like, I never understood what all these other speakers were saying. And when you said that, I kind of felt like this real raw, visceral emotion inside of me that I haven't felt as a kid. And so it's like, I'm always thinking about, as someone who's trying to make this happen, I'm always trying to think about like, how can I reverse engineer the mindset that I have today to the mindset that I used to have back then, so I can reach people that are still in that mindset, rather than just say, be positive, stay happy, do this, do that, and giving people things that are more powerful than words, things that people can actually do to help them move the needle a little bit. So I'm glad you like that.
Yes, of course. And clean talk always works with these kind of people, because motivation is always temporary and they always don't get motivation. It's like a filmy thing. So, which brings me to the next question, that somewhere you mentioned in your social media post that your ultimate weakness is your ultimate strength. So, you mean by this?
Oh, oh man, dang, this is a great question. So this is what I think I was saying. So I don't think there's any coincidence in the world that, like, doing what I do today, like speaking, whether it's on like the podcast that I have that's ranked in the top 100 in the world, or it's speaking internationally on stages. I don't think there's any coincidence between what I do today and the fact that not even that long ago, like when I was 15, 16, 17, and before that, I, like in school, for example, whenever I had to present, I either just wouldn't go up, I would go to the bathroom, or I'd just skip school that day. Right. And so it's like, I think the fact that my biggest weakness used to be talking to people, used to be communicating towards others, and having social anxiety, that now is one of my biggest strengths. And, obviously at times I still have maybe some anxiety. Still a normal human being. I still have problems. But I mean, my social anxiety is largely manageable. It's largely in controlled. And it's because I've had that now enables me to be such a powerful and thought-provoking speaker. And so that's one sense to look at it. Another sense is like, I didn't know, not necessarily I didn't know, but I was not certain on who I used to be. Right? Like I didn't have confidence. I didn't have self-esteem in who I was as a kid. Right. That was my weakness. But now, because I feel like I've lived like so many lives, because I feel like I've lived lifestyles of people that like when I look back at who I used to be, I can't even imagine. Like I'm just like so far disconnected because of all the work that I've done in now that I don't even remember what that feels like anymore. But it's that weakness of me living different lives, of me having other people's stories in my head govern myself. Like whether it was people told me I was a loser and I would never amount to anything. And then my brain picks that up and it starts to internalize it. And then it starts to emit those same thoughts as if they're my thoughts, which that's not true. It feels like because that was a weakness for so long, now one of my ultimate strengths is whenever I have a story that my brain is telling me, that my ego is telling me, whether it's, in a moment, like today, or it's, some event happens and my brain, gives me like that instant thought that's usually wrong. Like for example, I don't know, like just an example, like let's say you say, let's say I say something and you say, Mark, I don't really agree with that. I agree with this, and that, instead of maybe approaching that with humility, my brain would be like, this lady doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm so much better than her, right? Like a lot of these sort of instantaneous things that our brain tells us. I'm now able to like realize that story and just like instantly call it out and be like, that's BS. That's not me. That's not my higher, truer self, because I've had so many like false stories that I lived with inside of me that I'm now able to realize them in a second and call them out and get back on track. So yeah, I'm glad you asked me that. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. It's interesting.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad you like that question. And I love that answer that you gave. All right. So since mental health is such a pandemic issue right now, do you think that, more and more schools and colleges need to take up this kind of awareness, maybe in terms of syllabus or exceptional subjects or whatever it is, because schools and colleges, I don't think are doing, the amount of work they should do in terms of this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so I'm 22 years old. I have a lot of my friends that are still in college. And honestly, I hate to say this, and I don't necessarily think this is true for everyone. Honestly, I think one of the number one causes of stress is school, like hands down. Like 7th graders do not need to be spending 2 hours on solving problems that have different syllables, different symbols. And they have to, I don't know, add, subtract, multiply, divide. They have to get their parents involved because they don't know. Their parents don't know. They have to Google it. Then they just like copy answers from the internet. it's such a piece of crap in my opinion. And I'm so glad that, so this summer I'm going to be involved in this documentary series for Amazon Prime that is going to be shown to 500 million people around the world, which I'm so excited about. And like, it's a documentary series about solving the world's biggest problems. And the problem that my team has is reinventing the education system. And that is one of the first things that I'm going to do. And I hope people can see what we're doing on Amazon Prime, this TV thing. And then whether it's teachers or principals or superintendents or administrators or students or parents, I hope they can see this and actually reflect and do the same thing in their community. But, honestly, it's like, it's definitely a large conversation. I'm not saying that if we're able to solve the education system, or if only teachers would do this, or if only schools would do this, then all of our problems would be solved. It's a much more complicated issue. It's very complex. But in it at the same ways, I think that schools, especially at a young level, they should teach just like the straight up human fundamentals. Like, what does a human being have to do, right? Like, what if you don't do it, you'll die, right? So what is that? You have to breathe, okay? You have to eat. You have to drink. You have to sleep. You have to move. You have to talk to people. And that's basically it. I mean, there's maybe one or two other ones that you have to do. If we could focus on those 6 or 7 things and we taught people, this is how you actually do them based on thousands of years of human history of successful societies that have done it before, and also science that we have today. It's like, hey, your breath, for example, is not just like this unconscious thing that you don't pay attention to. Your breath is actually the anchor of life. And like, imagine what this world would look like if we began teaching little kids like different breathing exercises. This is what you do if you're nervous. This is what you do if you're angry. Imagine if we began teaching kids about very basic forms about meditation. Next up, food. Imagine if we began teaching kids about food, about like, hey, when you eat this, this is what happens to your body. When you don't eat this, this is also what happens to your body. This is the best food for someone like you, for example. Food is not just about adding pounds to your waistline. Food is also heavily correlated to someone's mental health. Sleep, right? It's like, hey, instead of pulling all-nighters to do your stupid homework that is not going to be important for the rest of your life, or staying up playing video games, did you know if you get 8 hours of sleep, you are already ahead of 60% of studies that show that mental illness is correlated to some degree of sleep dysfunction. I could keep going, but it's like, if we could start with the very most basic levels of human society, it's like, hey, this is how you talk to people. This is how you deal with your emotions. If we're able to do that, then I think we could go a long, long, long way. And I'm not saying like, hey, we need to get rid of, math, for example. Like, I think if we can introduce kids to a basic level of math to teach them how like logic works in someone's brain. And, math is very, very important. Like, math is the way that our society goes round. And, if you're an engineer, or if you're a job that's related to that and you're building structures in society, math is super important. But like, I remember when I was a kid getting super anxious about like this test that I got a 39 on and I failed. And I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to be successful in my life. And it's like, I have literally never thought about that again in my life based on what I do today. And whether that's at a young kid, like kindergarten, preschool, first, second, third grade level, to even college, that's even better. And, honestly, they're like, schools are starting to do this. And I think that change is going to come from a decentralized peer-to-peer level. Personally for me, I don't really think that we can look towards the government to solve these issues, because I don't know about you, but the government in America, there's a lot of great people in the government for sure. Like, I know I have a lot of people that work in the government and whatnot. But I think that change is going to happen at a grassroots ground level through local government, teachers, parents, administrators saying, screw this. And I know a lot of them. My sister is a teacher, at a public school. Like, she talks to me about this stuff. I know people that are administrators and that are principals that are beginning to talk about this stuff. But if we're going to like sit back here and say like, hey, we have to let the government do this, it's never going to happen. Our government is too busy spending trillions of dollars on building better weapons to disenfranchise generations in the Middle East and in other countries. They don't care about education at a generalized, very broad level. And so I think that education is going to be solved by ordinary people, parents, teachers, entrepreneurs. I think that's probably the biggest one. Like, I already know entrepreneurs that are building virtual reality systems that have artificial intelligence that kids can wear, that can teach them how to learn based on what the AI has learned, on how best they learn. I know people that are doing like crazy things. I know people that are starting their own schools and bringing in these human elements. And so I just think it's going to take time. And I also hope that the more we can have this conversation, and also on Amazon Prime and all that stuff, I hope we can, get people more familiar with this. But I think it's so important.
First of all, a big congratulations for that. Amazon Prime, and I'm waiting to watch it. And of course, it is going to be great, and it is going to be the game changer. And as you mentioned, yes, transformational education is the one that we want and need instead of the conventional education. And thank you for sharing that so much in details. And you also spoke about food, which brings me to the next question, that in one of your episodes, you mentioned that you generally eat what comes from directly the ground instead of the granola bars, processed foods like that. So do you think the diet plays a very important role in mental health, and how?
So first off, this is like one of the best interviews I've ever been a part of.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. I'm really glad.
Of course. So this is it, right? So remember when I told you about when I was at my rock bottom, and I wasn't conscious of all these issues, but I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, wow, I gained a lot of weight, right? And so my first starting point of like self-development, mindset, whatever you want to call it, was with physical health, right? And I remember it took me a little while to learn about it, but I remember reading books about like nutrition. I remember reading articles on the internet about food, all these different things. And, I basically began to eat a diet that, long story short, is, like you said, it is things that are natural, things that, God has made, although technically everything is natural. That's a whole other argument. But it's basically like things that come from the ground, or things that have been walking on the ground, or things that have been swimming underground or whatever. And so when I began to eat a diet like that versus what I used to eat, which was, pizza, chicken wings, cookies, brownies, soda, fruit juices, things that were not green. And so when I began to eat a diet like that, not only did I lose the weight, but I felt like my brain turned on for the first time. And when my brain turned on the first time, I began to pick up a lot of other habits because I had way more energy. I felt like I could think clearly for the first time ever in my life. And I was able to gain more awareness about everything that just happened the last few months, the last few years. And so that's where I began to like look into meditation and exercise and all these different things. And so, my understanding of it has changed over the years, but this is where it is right now. So, in terms of mental health, in terms of how Western treatment is mostly set up, is if you have a mental health problem, you go to your doctor and you're prescribed usually an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Okay. And I don't necessarily think this is good or bad. I think they can be used in the right kinds of situations. But just taking a form of medicine that's an SSRI for the rest of your life and not doing anything else will probably lead you to having worse mental health problems over time because you're not addressing the root issue. And so you look at serotonin, right? It's a neurotransmitter. It's like basically the main neurotransmitter that people talk about when it comes to like happiness, your mood, depression, even things like leadership. It's much more complex in its function. But according to the latest science, most of our serotonin isn't even in our brain. Most of our serotonin is in our gut microbiome, which is like in between our intestines and our stomach. And it's this community of trillions of bacteria that have existed ever since humans have been formed in a symbiotic relationship that keeps us alive and we keep them alive. 90% of our serotonin is in our gut microbiome, which is heavily correlated to what you eat. And so the reason why I'm so big on food, like if people listen to my podcast or people like read my content on social media, the reason why I'm so big into food is because, there's a lot of people, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with this, but there's a lot of people that take someone who's depressed or has anxiety and they're like, hey, read this book that'll tell you how to retrain your thoughts or rewire your whatever it is, affirmations, this and that. I think those are great. I think those can be very important, but that's basically like trying to install, like, I don't know if you have an iPhone, but I do, but that's basically like trying to install the latest version of iOS software to like an iPhone 4. So if you have outdated hardware, your brain or your body, and you're trying to install new things on there, it does not work. You may be able to download 5% of it, 10% of it, but you're not going to be able to meaningfully download all that information and use it. So when somebody, for example, begins to eat healthier, let's say they begin to eat more vegetables and they begin to get more nutrients and minerals into their body. And then they start to eat more like healthy dietary fat. And then all of a sudden they feel like their brain is starting to work. And instead of, crashing at noon or 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. and reaching to grab, a cup of coffee that maybe has like 40 grams of sugar in it, they have energy. And it's like, you don't actually know who you are if you don't have energy. Right. So it's like, let's say you could be the world's nicest person. You could be the world's most passionate, patient, compassionate, kind, helpful. You want to help the world. You want to change the world. But if your body, if your brain does not have the raw resources to create energy, you are not going to be able to be yourself. And so it's like, if you are able to get somebody to change their hardware first, through food, and then whether it's, through food, they have more energy. Now they can exercise. Now they can sleep well for 7 to 8 hours. Then it's like, then they can begin to get a clear mind and install that new software that's at the surface level of like your thoughts and your logical brain. And so that's why I talk about it so much, because it's like, if someone is depressed, if someone is anxious, you could give them all of the motivational quotes in the world, and it's not going to mean a thing to them. But if you're like, hey, dude, just start eating this thing, and then start eating that thing, and then start eating this thing, and then start eating that thing, and the next thing you know, they've slowly beginning to remove the processed foods from their diet. They're beginning to remove things that don't do anything but harm their body, and they're able to add on nutrients, fats, things of that nature. And they can begin to feel like themselves, they can have more energy, then they're like, wow, it's actually way easier for me to think positive, or for me to, rewire my mindset now that I have the right kind of hardware. But it's like, I see people all day that are in the self-development world that have been in it for like 10 years or 5 years. And again, I'm not trying to like say anything, like I still have problems too. I still sometimes get anxiety and whatnot, but that still face a lot of the problems that they faced ever since early on, because they never changed their biochemistry. So it's like they read something and they expect, a lot of their problems to go away. And it's like, the matter of the fact is like, if you don't change your neurobiology, your biochemistry, which is heavily correlated to your psychology, then you're just going to be like a hamster on a wheel. You're going to be like, you're going to be one of those people that's like on YouTube all day, that's watching motivational YouTube videos to get energy because you don't have it within yourself. And so obviously there is a fine line, because you could be eating, for example, all the healthy food in the world, but you could not be doing good things with them, right? And so there's a lot of ways to go, but I'm saying this especially like today, especially in America, where a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers, a lot of young adults, a lot of older people too, a lot of senior citizens, we're not taught anything on food. Like, we're taught zero on food. And so it's like, hey, like I had this expert on my podcast come on, and she's like, hey, you have somebody take an omega-3 supplement. You have someone take and this depends on the person. You have someone take a vitamin D or a magnesium supplement. You have them start changing the right kinds of foods. You have them sleeping well. Next thing you know, the depression that they've always had for their entire lives is now gone. And obviously it's not like that simple some of the times, but sometimes it is. That was definitely the case for me, especially someone who was diagnosed with a lot of physical health issues growing up, things like asthma, things like IBS, things like appendicitis, things like ADHD. When I changed my food, almost all of my health conditions went away. Like, I remember going to my doctor, and he was like, yeah, I don't know what happened, but like, yeah, you don't need to take this medicine on that you've been taking for your entire life. Like, you can stop taking it. And so I think food is honestly going to solve a lot of the world's problems, whether that's like from the environmental standpoint or from a mental health standpoint or from a community standpoint. Like, they've even done studies, for example, that show in prison, so in a controlled population, they've done studies that show one group of prisoners that were fed like the normal prison diet, and then another group that was fed the normal prison diet, but they also gave them a multivitamin. And they saw over the course of months, I think it was something like a 50% decrease in violence in the group that had taken the multivitamin. And so it's like, as someone who's been heavily inflicted on this my whole life, I have no doubt. And like, I have so many people that I talk to, so many people that I know in real life, business leaders of successful companies, of people that reach out to me on email, through my podcast, or on LinkedIn, and they say, hey, Mark, I began to take your advice. I stopped eating processed foods. I stopped drinking soda. I began to eat, I don't know, like, again, there's no such thing as a universal diet, but I began to eat vegetables and fats, and like, my anxiety is half gone. My depression is half gone. And so I think if you can give someone that as advice, you don't even need to give them inspirational advice or quotes, because they can begin to find out who they are if their brain starts working properly through, serotonin. 90% of it is in your gut microbiome. So food, I cannot talk about it enough. Like, we could literally do a separate podcast on food for sure. And it's like a major chapter in my book, Screw Being Shy, on your biochemistry. So it's all connected.
Thank you so much, Mark, for describing it so precisely and logically, which makes absolute sense why it is so important to stick to the ground and the natural food habits. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And which brings me to the next question, when you mentioned that, all your experiences, food, your personal experiences, your experiences with other people, everything you have mentioned in your book, and a major chapter is about food over there. So tell me something about your book, and who is this book exactly for, and how are those people going to benefit from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we rewind, when I was telling you, sort of one of the first problems that I became conscious of my life was having social anxiety, right? And when I became conscious of that problem, I tried everything I could to solve it, right? I tried right ways to do it. I tried wrong ways to do it. This is before I was like reading books and things and whatnot. And so for maybe like a year, I kind of had to like put myself in like my own room and literally just figure out how I'm going to do this by myself. And so a lot of the things that I've learned on how to get out of social anxiety, I have yet to see in any other book. I have yet to see in any other place on the internet. And, if you Google social anxiety books or shy books or whatever, there's a lot of great books out there. There's a lot of great books that are written by like behavioral analysts. There's books that are written by psychologists. I'm friends with a lot of those people. I think a lot of them are very smart. They're very great. But I have yet to stumble on a single book that is written in a common sense way that is still backed by science and not just some person's random words and anecdotes, and that has a lot of the methods and solutions that I found on social anxiety just through trial and error. And so this is a book for someone that wants to be their true self in front of anyone. There's a lot of people that, they may not be shy around their kids, or they may not be shy around their mom or their dad. But when they're at work, or they're in front of their boss, or they are at an event, they're super shy. And that's because they haven't exactly sort of gone to the root issue. They haven't exactly gone to the root problem. And so this book is for someone that is relatively simple-minded. This book is written in an extremely easily digestible way. It's not that long whatsoever. This book is really for anyone that struggles with being shy, introverted, socially anxious, doesn't know how to be themselves in front of people, whether you're a kid, kids can read this, or whether you're an adult or you're a 50-year-old. And then it's also written for the last chapter of the book is for kind of written for like shy, like entrepreneurs at an organizational level. And that also means that, this book is made, you can gift it to your 14-year-old son who has no friends and doesn't know how to talk to people. You can gift it to your daughter who is also facing anxiety. You can gift it to a friend of yours. And so, honestly, the book, this is the first book I've ever written. I know I'm going to write a lot of other books. So this book, the digital version, the electronic version, like the one that you can read on Kindle or on your phone or whatever, I'm releasing that totally for free. People can get that on my website March 14th when the book comes out. I'm releasing the audiobook for free. And I'm also doing, so the book doesn't have much to do with my life. It's not really about that. It has to do with just a very practical way to do it. But the audiobook, in between the chapters, I'm having a friend of mine interview me. And that's where I'm going to talk about more of my story, just, because we know stories connect ideas much more in someone's brain. So the audiobook's going to be for free. And then the physical book, the one that people can buy on Amazon, like the hardcover, they can buy that. Obviously, that's not for free, but I'm going to take 10% of the profits and donate that to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And so honestly, I just want this book to get out there as much as possible. I'm like going on every single podcast that I know. I already have a confirmation from Forbes that they're going to be doing an interview on it. I have a lot of people that are helping me out a lot on this, and I hope the ideas in my book can become mainstream so that social anxiety, being shy, isn't even a problem anymore. I hope schools and colleges buy my book and hand them out to people that are struggling with this, because honestly, this is the thing that I learned. There's a lot of problems that someone can have, right? Like social anxiety is not the only problem, but I think that social anxiety is one of the worst problems somebody could possibly have. Why? Because social anxiety is heavily linked to social isolation, which is heavily linked to loneliness, which is heavily linked to substance abuse and suicide. And it's like, if you are having problems, but you can't talk about them because you're shy to someone else, you are not going to go down a great path in life. And so I think my book is going to be a killer solution for people that are too afraid to talk to people about it, for people that are too afraid to go to therapy yet. Because if you can read this book by yourself and you're like, wow, there's like actual legitimate things, like 1, 2, 3 things I can do here. And at the end of every single chapter, there's challenges, there's exercises that someone can do. I think it can go a long way. And I hope that the ideas in my book become mainstream. I hope that they can become so accepted by society's waking level of consciousness that we don't have this issue anymore, the same way that I was affected by it for 10 years of my life.
So can you just name your book?
Oh yeah, it's called Screw Being Shy, How to Eliminate Social Anxiety and Be Yourself in Front of Anyone. And for people that are interested in it, if you go to my website, Mark Metry, my first and last name.com, there should be an email box. And if you put in your email there, you will get alerted when the book is out.
So it's Screw Being Shy. And
Yes.
It's a kick-ass title, first of all. And also, just to rephrase, this book is for everyone, be it kid, be it adult, or be it any senior person, anybody out there, anybody who is going through any kind of internal problem or any kind of social anxiety, stress, or any kind of problem which they are not being able to speak to anybody, right? It is going to help them at large.
Yeah. And also, this is also what I've seen. I've seen a lot of people, especially like in the business entrepreneur world, that say, I'm not shy, I'm not socially anxious. But then when they go to a party or when they go to an event, and I'm not judging, when they go to an event, the first thing that they go to is they go to the bar and they grab a drink of alcohol. Why? Because alcohol is one of the most commonly used medicines for social anxiety. People drink it and, now I can talk to people. And so this book is for people that really just want to get to the root cause and don't want to be caught up by these little traps that society tells us we should do and that are acceptable.
This sounds really interesting, and I'm really waiting to read your book, and I'm sure it's going to touch billions of hearts out there and billions of lives out there, and it be available in every school and colleges and every institutions which deemed it necessary, and the students or people get help out of it. And I wish you all the best for the book and a big success. Not just bestseller or best impacting, but it reaches beyond your control. So, who's your favorite author?
Oh man, honestly, I'm not sure, but I would say right now, Mark Manson. He wrote the books, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a and everything. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Mark mentioned. Okay. What is your favorite book till date?
My favorite book? Oh man. Honestly, it changes from time to time. Right now, I'd probably say Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, great. Okay. Next question is, if not an entrepreneur, podcast host, or a global change maker, what would Mark Metry be?
I would be a world-class chef. Cooking is probably one of my favorite hobbies to do. I try my best to do it every day. And I have no doubt, like 10 years from now in the future, when I have this chapter of my life more established, I have no doubt I'm going to become like a world-class chef on like TV or teaching people how to cook healthy meals without spending too much money.
Wow, I love that answer because I'm a big foodie and I love food.
Me too.
Okay, great. So you would be a chef, and very soon we are going to see in your that avatar too. So, Mark, how can our listeners connect with you?
If you Google my name, Mark Metry, you'll see everything like my podcast, my LinkedIn, my Instagram. I'm probably the most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you want to reach out to me, just follow me, send me a personalized connection request, send me a DM, and I'll try my best to get back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark, for, coming to my podcast and answering such, questions in detail and helping the people understand what goes behind and what it takes to be where you are and what exactly is social anxiety all about. Thank you so much, and all the best for your next journey, the Amazon, the book, everything that's going to come.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Woo! Thank you for having me.